Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All praise for Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad, his companions, and all those who strive to follow in their footsteps. Welcome, my dear viewers, brothers and sisters, to another episode of Quraan Science brought to you from Huda TV. My name is Sharif Al-Tuni, and in this topic we will be speaking about this miraculous barrier that separates between the salt sea and the sweet sea. For this explanation, for this scientific explanation, we have with us in the studio Professor of Geology, Zaghlul Naggar. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to the show, sir.
Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh.
I'd like also to introduce my guests and brothers here in this episode for questions regarding this topic. So I have with me Abdul Halim Khalil and Abdul Rahman Ismail. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to the show. Okay, before we move on to further explanation about this scientific reason for this barrier between the sweet and salt sea, or sweet and salt water, I'll leave you with this verse, this holy verse from Surah Al-Furqan, and we'll return back, so stay tuned.
وهو الذي مرج البحرين هذا عذب فرات وهذا ملح أجاج وجعل بينهما برزخا وحجرا محجورا.
It is He who merged the two bodies of water, one palatable and sweet, and the other salty and bitter, and placed between them a barrier forbidden to pass.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back. You're watching Quraan Science. As I mentioned in the previous segment, this edition or this episode is all about the barrier between the sweet and the salty water. So this was Surah Al-Furqan, the 53rd verse of Surah Al-Furqan. And now I'll ask my brothers what the meanings that they're getting from this verse. So I'll start first with Abdul Halim.
The verse, from what I understand, is the two waters, the two different types of waters meet, but they don't mix.
Yes.
The salt and the fresh water. What it means is that we must remember that Allah, He's the one who created the laws of physics and the laws of all of the science. Only His creations are bound by this. So if we put salt and the fresh water, they'll mix.
Yes.
Right away. But Allah in the big ocean, the huge ocean, they'll never mix. It's an everlasting miracle. Only Allah could break the law of physics that He made for us.
Okay. Abdul Rahman.
I absolutely agree with my brother Abdul Halim.
Beautiful words from Abdul Halim.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is exactly what the verse says, and the verse is describing the operation. Here the water comes in the river from its head to its end, and we never hear about sea overwhelming a river.
Yes.
As far as I know, this has never happened before.
Okay, let's know more from the scientific opinion from Professor Zaghlul Naggar.
I praise Allah, the Almighty, our Lord, our Creator, the Creator of everything in that universe. And I greet you all in our Islamic way. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace, blessings, and mercy be with you all. Of course, we know that the water cycle around the earth is one of the miracles of the Creator. Because without this water cycle, all the water on earth would have rotted in no time, would have been impotable and not suitable for drinking or for even agriculture. Because in every cubic millimeter of water, we have actually thousands of living beings that live and die in it every second. So when the rain first came down on the surface of that globe, it rushed from the peaks of mountains towards the lower areas, depressed areas, and infilled these depressed areas to constitute oceans and seas. These oceans and seas started initially with fresh water. So much so that the repetition of the cycle, you see, you add salinity to the oceanic waters. The more cycle that goes on, the more saline these oceanic waters become. And actually, in the early days of geology, we used to use the salinity of the oceanic waters as a means to estimate the age of the earth. You can calculate how much salt is added annually to these seas and oceans, and you can calculate the volume of these depressed areas and the average salinity of the water, and you get the total amount of salt. Dividing that by the annual increment of this salt, you can get an estimate, a rough estimate about how old is the earth. So finally, the oceanic waters became saline, and the fresh water, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala planned that the sun rays would evaporate some of that water to bring it down to earth as fresh water for life to continue to exist. And we have 380,000 cubic kilometers of water evaporated annually from both the land and sea. 60 million of those come from land, and the rest come from the sea. And we get more rain. We actually 96,000 cubic kilometers of fresh water come to land, and the plus 36,000 kilometers flow to the sea. So we have a very well planned system. And in that very well,
and is it constant?
No,
is it a constant?
Constant, yes. This is very constant. To indicate to every sane person how wonderful the build-up of our globe and of the universe at large is.
Yes.
And by continuing this process, of course, we had two different types of waters: fresh water on land and saline water in oceans and seas. And how could a river flow into a sea without intermingling and mixing with the saline water? Usually rivers flow from high elevations to the zero level, the sea level. So the rush of the water due to that head can allow the fresh water to move into the sea or into the ocean for actually hundreds of kilometers without mixing with the saline water. And in many areas, you can get in front of the delta of a river, you get a buried delta, a delta under the sea. And in that delta under the sea, you will get two sides built of sediment and a barrier at the front, or at the head of it. And this buried delta can maintain a huge amount of fresh water within the saline marine waters without mixing completely with each other. Even if they mix, you will have a sheet of what we call brackish water, medium saline water. Yani not purely saline, but half saline water.
Yes.
Call it brackish water. Brackish water can again build another barrier to separate the purely fresh water from the purely saline water.
Yes.
And strangely enough, in every one of these environments, you see, the environment itself has got its own physical-chemical characteristics, its own temperature, its own degree of salinity, its own type of sediments, and its own life forms. And the life forms in every environment cannot migrate to the other environment, otherwise it will be killed. Except for a very few examples that can transgress this boundary, but the majority of forms of life, each is restricted to its own environment. Another reason for this separation is that the water molecule is a dipolar molecule. The two hydrogen atoms carry a positive charge, and the oxygen atom carries a negative charge. And once you get these polar molecules, or dipolar molecules, facing a similar charge in the saline water, particularly that the saline water carry many anions and many cations, you see, because of the salt that's in it. And you get this repulsion, this electric repulsion between similar charges that also can create a further barrier to keep that fresh water for as long distances as it can without, they meet actually, without purely mixing one with the other.
Yes, but this would exist in a normal experiment, in a normal easy experiment, the same resistance?
Yes.
Or is it a combination of the resistance of the ionic resistance and also the pressure and the speed of water?
Yes, the pressure as well, the head that water is coming with.
Yes.
But the main thing is that Allah has created this characteristic in the water molecule, that it is a dipolar molecule. One pole is carrying a positive charge and the other pole is carrying a negative charge. And of course, through the density of cations and anions in the saline water, it happens that similar charges can face each other and they repel against each other, so that an electric barrier would be formed around the fresh water or the brackish water or the saline water, and they will never mix. And I know that you lived in Bahrain for some times.
Yes, this is
and
very
the name Bahrain comes from the fact that freshwater springs come from within the saline water, and they meet and they never mix. And divers used to go down to catch these springs and infill their bags, you see, or their pots, you see, with fresh water from within the sea.
From the
Within the
deep
sea. And hence the name came Al-Bahrain, the two seas.
is,
one fresh and one is saline.
This is very great. We will now move for a very short break and return back for more explanation and more questions regarding this beautiful topic.
مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان.
He released the two seas meeting together. Between them is a barrier which they cannot cross.
As everyone knows, today Arabic is considered as very important, very significant language. How can we produce the sound, the state of voicing, place of articulation, and manner of articulation? So in Arabic, the words which are written are pronounced.
We will learn how to write and pronounce Arabic letters correctly in depth. Explanation via board and presentation with many other important factors.
And we have today more than 300 million people speak Arabic language. Not only in the Middle East, but you can find a lot of people speak Arabic language in Asia, Europe, North America, and in South America.
What are you waiting for? Grab your notebook and pencil and stay tuned for Learn Arabic at Huda TV.
Back you're watching Quraan Science, and we were just speaking about the barrier between the sweet and the salty waters, and now we'll open up for more questions from Abdul Halim regarding this topic.
I was wondering, we've seen in everyday life, if you can put two different waters of different density, the lighter will go on top. But it's like on top of each other. But in the sea, it's unique that there is a barrier on the side as well.
No, there is also barrier at the bottom. Because usually fresh water is less dense than the saline water. Saline water is heavier. And that's why the fresh water, as the river debouches in the sea, as the river throws its water in the sea, you will find that the fresh water will flow for several kilometers, you see, on top of the saline water without mixing. So the barriers are not only on the sides and at the front, but they are also at the base.
Okay. Abdul Rahman?
I wonder why the proportion of fresh water is always less than the proportion of saline water on Earth. If we compare the amount of fresh water versus the amount of saline water, it's much less than it.
This is a miracle by itself, because once you get salt dissolved in water, this becomes a way of protecting this water from further rotting and going bad. So the more saline the water is, the better protected this water is from the decaying animals and decaying plants and the decaying other forms of life that would be in them.
So salt is a preservative for water.
They are better preserved. So the amount of fresh water is in exactly the same requirement that would maintain life on Earth. If we had more rain, more excessive rain can be destructive. If we had less rain, people will die out of thirst, you see. So there is a beautiful balance. And I tried to give an example by this balance. I said, you get 60,000 kilometers of fresh water rising from land, you see, and 320,000 kilometers rising from the seas and oceans. But when the rain comes, you get 96,000 kilometers of fresh water coming on land. Isn't that a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We have 36,000 kilometers plus every year coming to us through rain. And then, so that it will not drown life on Earth, after doing its role on the surface of our planet, it flows back to the sea.
But
so that the level of water in the sea will remain constant in every episode. And at the same time, we will use that water and it flows back to the sea.
I also wonder why God has called it two seas, despite the fact that in other verses the river was called the river. Why we call it here a sea?
Because the Arabs used to call both the river and the sea with the term al-bahr. And al-bahr is a term that means vast expansion of water body.
So it's just a lingual aspect,
lingual
yeah.
difference, more than that, yes.
Dr. Zaghlul, this verse comes in a very important surah, Surah Al-Furqan, which is actually the name of the Holy Quran, and it means the difference between truth and falsehood. So do you think this verse has been placed from within this specific surah for a certain reason, maybe an indication of the barrier or the separation or the difference between the truth and falsehood?
Yes. You see, in as much as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down the Quran, the name word Al-Furqan means the thing that differentiates between what's right and what's wrong. And in as much as these barriers separate fresh water from saline water, or fresh water from brackish water, or brackish water from saline water, the Quran is doing exactly the same thing in our lives, distinguishing truthfulness from falsehood, distinguishing a true religion from false one, distinguishing what pleases Allah from what displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it comes beautifully in context in a surah called Al-Furqan. Al-Furqan, the thing that differentiates between what's right and what's wrong.
And the analogy is done in a sort of form because, you mentioned that there are a couple of reasons that making the barrier between the sweet and the sweet and the salty water, but they tend to be very close to each other, while the truth is really on the right side and the falsehood is on the left.
But you see, again, you can find lots of gray areas, and we are forbidden to indulge into it, you see.
Yes.
The Prophet used to say, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al-halalu bayyin wal-haramu bayyin wa baynahum umur mushtabihat.
Yes.
So you can get this gray area
Exactly.
between what's truth and what's false, and a Muslim is asked not to indulge into these gray areas because it can lead somebody astray.
If I could summarize the reasons for this barrier, you mentioned at the beginning the high speed and rushing of water from a
Yes.
high inclined
Yes.
area to a low sea level, and the other one was the
density.
The density, and the third, I guess,
difference
is
in
the
density,
difference in
which is
the
very
ionic
important. Yes.
difference.
And then the ionic difference.
So these are the three main scientific
And
reasons.
also
for
we
this
have
barrier.
a sedimentary barrier.
Yes,
As I
the
said,
one you
in as
exactly.
much as a river can build a delta on land, it can build a delta, a submerged delta, and this submerged delta also plays a role, you see, in preserving the fresh water away from the brackish and saline water.
So if we can explain the creation of deltas itself, how it was created. And what's the
Delta is
importance.
mainly created by the amount of sediments carried by the flowing river. As the river flows from a high head to the sea level, of course it has got a highly erosive power, and this power breaks the rocks on the way, and that's why it cuts the passageway of the river. And during this process of cutting down, it fragments the rock into a sediment, into loose material. And of course, as the speed of the running water decreases towards the sea, it started to deposit, and that's why a delta is formed.
It's great. Okay, any further questions from my brothers?
Islam, of course, is all about unity. One God, He's the one who created everything. So about the rivers, fresh water in the ocean, this could be the same as is it the same idea maybe as the wind? There's some winds that like a river, but in the wind, some wind going this way, another one
Yes.
going this way.
Yes.
In the wind, like the
Yes.
river.
Yeah, and actually, if you see the direction of the wind around the globe, you can see an image of the wonders of the creation, because every type of wind is playing a certain role on the surface of that planet. In exactly the same way, every type of river is flowing in a direction, either from south to north, or from east to west, or from west to east, and then it's fragmenting the rocks, producing the soil, concentrating certain minerals, and dissolving some of it, increasing the salinity of the ocean and the sea. So it's really a very, very well planned and very well organized system that was designed for the benefit of humanity and for a better life for man on the surface of that planet.
It doesn't change that much, only minor changes. But
Only minor changes unless man interferes.
Aye.
And if man interferes, he ruins everything,
Aye.
spoils everything.
So, Doctor, is it possible to have new rivers created?
Definitely, because this is a continuous process. Nothing stops it until the end of this world. But the process is so slow that nobody can observe it in his lifetime. Yani, we may see today some small tributaries that can develop through time into a river, probably in the future. But as I said, it's a very, very slow process because it's not an easy task to cut down the channel for a flowing river. It takes millions of years, breaking rock into soil, carrying that soil, flowing towards the sea, and once it reaches the sea, it has to start building a delta. So it is a tedious, complex, and steady process that needs lots of energy and needs lots of time at the same time.
Also, you mentioned during this episode about using the salinity of the water itself in the oceans, it's possible for human to find out how old is the Earth.
Yes.
So is this a lengthy process also like the one you mentioned? Does it take a lot of time? Would we as human experience it?
Oh yes.
And feel the difference?
Oh yes, it has been experienced. You see, we know the volume of the depressions that constitute seas and oceans. We know the amount of water in the seas and oceans. We know the average salinity all over the globe, and we can measure the increment, the annual increment in that salinity. So it's a very simple process. It doesn't give a proper age for the Earth, but it needs an approximate age for the formation of seas and oceans, which is it was used in the past before discovering radioactivity and using it as a means of determining the age of rocks and the age of the Earth and the age of the universe at large through meteoric bodies that come down to us. This process, the salinity of oceanic waters method, was used to give man a rough estimate how old is the Earth.
Yes. So 10 years ago, if we took a little bit of ocean sea and we put it on the tip of the tongue, you'll find a difference.
Oh yeah. You may not feel it through the tongue, but through chemical analysis, you will definitely prove it.
Right, this was very informative. We thank you very much, Professor of Geology Zaghroun Naggar, for being here with us. It was a pleasure to have you with us at Huda TV.
Thank you.
I'd like also to thank my brothers Abdul Halim Khalil and Abdurrahman Ismail for being here with us. Thank you very much.